Okay, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon.
Yeah. Okay.
Good afternoon.
Orlando,
Good morning.
Good morning.
you have to unmute yourself, Orlando.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our global virtual conference. It's great to see all of you, especially those of you who have put on your cameras so we know what you look like with a year after Corona. I can see many of you have grown beards. Others have let your hair grow. And some of you look just like you did last year with nothing, no changes. I'm amazed. You're working out very hard. Thank you for those that are dialing in, especially from the Americas. We know it's very early, so we appreciate our friends in Latin America. There will be a session this afternoon for all of you. But here we are. So we want to make the next couple of hours exhilarating, exciting, thought-provoking, thought-leading. And we're impressed that this is the most and best attended conference that we've had in our history. And I think the interest comes from a lot of different angles. But as you know, there's been significant changes, both technology-wise, but also the roster of the firms. So we will learn a little bit more about that. We also want to specially acknowledge a warm welcome to the members of our advisory board. So very happy to see all our friends from Irvin Mitchell, from Israel, Stefan, and of course, Klaus and Marcus from Germany, and our Colombian friends, and our friends from the US, our newest members to the board. So we're all delighted that you're here, especially thanks for those of you that put on a tie, like Giorgio. Giorgio, I guess you and I go back a long way, so we're wearing ties. But most people don't do that anymore. But anyway, so let us start. We do have a lot to cover. The agenda would be as follows. So this is me doing the introduction. We will have a very exciting screen share on global economic trends. You know, a year has passed. Most of us have managed to cope and survive. Some have actually thrived. Many of our members have thrived during this last year, and we'll hear some of the developments about that. It's a very dense presentation with a lot of statistical analytical data, so we hope that you bear with us. We will send you that information later so that you can digest it internally and share it with your colleagues at your offices. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about the legal industry developments, in particular, some big projects that we worked on with the likes of Shell. That we'll talk about that later on. There's always exciting news on business development. For the past year, FLI has been breaking ground with our big data analytics in our business development activities. We have secured new clients, most of whom will actually be on the panel tomorrow. So not only are we going to have some of the old timers, but the old timers decided that it would be better to pass the microphone to the newcomers, and the old timers are going to be in the audience, and the newcomers are going to be moderating the panels, which I think is very exciting. Then we have some marketing strategies, things that we're doing around the world. Some of you are already involved with these things, and others are not yet, because as you know, these are country specific. And then before we close, we do want to share with you the latest development on the FLI Institute, which is our technology. I know that the majority are now using the platform on a regular basis. I know that we are here at HQ in Brussels. That's all we do. We're only using email really rarely. It's all primarily the platform. So we're excited about that. And we really enjoy seeing your names pop in on the bell, on the notice bell to tell us, oh, you got something from Oksana, you got to check it. And I click it, and there's Oksana talking to us about what she's doing for us in country. So exciting stuff all around. So there will be also time for you as we go through the presentation. we would like you to use the question feature. Since we are expecting more than 100 plus to this session, then either raise the hand if you have a question that you would like everybody else to hear, or at least send us the question digitally, and we'll try to address it and get the audience engaged. So without further ado, once again, a big warm welcome to all of you in your respective jurisdictions. Just delighted to see you, happy that you're coping well with what now seems to be perhaps the end, or at least the beginning of the end of these crises, as most countries have now are well on their way in their vaccines, and the economy cycle seems to be recovering to some extent. So with that in mind, I'm now going to turn it over to Daniel for the economic trends and legal industry development presentation. So let's take it from there, and I'll be right back. Daniel.
Thanks, Orlando. And I'm glad you said that it wasn't the beginning of the end, but in a positive sense, it's the beginning of the end of COVID, although I know a lot of jurisdictions are still battling through it. Here in Brussels. Vaccines are being rolled out quite aggressively. I know a few other jurisdictions like Israel and the UK as well. And so obviously we wish everyone a safe and healthy recovery. I know other jurisdictions are still a little bit far out. But that being said, the best way to start our, FLI annual spring conference, which of course we'd love to have in person, but now for the second year in a row, we will be doing it online, is to actually talk about the state of the economy. As attorneys, as law firms, as legal services providers, oftentimes the amount of work that we will be able to absorb and the type of work that we'll be able to assist with and to assist our clients with will be very closely correlated to the actual economic trends that are ongoing, the state of the market health, and the state of the market overall. So it's important for us to look back at it. And during our November session, we reviewed some of the impacts that COVID-19 had on it. And I just want to, put out a disclaimer out there. This is not going to be a COVID-centric presentation. I think we've all had quite a lot of information on that so far. But what we will do is we will focus on some of the indicators that we're seeing, translate them into what we're seeing in terms of the responses by international global legal services providers, think a little bit more about them in terms of any of the changes that have come into force with regard to client expectations and client demand, and then look at how, as a network, and how you as individual law firms position yourselves in your domestic and international markets as well. And as part of that, as Orlando mentioned, we'll also have a guest speaker from Lexology, which is one of FLI's publishing partners, to speak a little bit more on that as well. So very exciting presentation all around. So just to get started, and I think to break the ice a little bit and to understand where we're at, here's a few interesting charts to look at real GDP growth over the last 20 years, and particularly to look at 2020, which similarly resembles the 2008 financial crisis, of course. But also interesting to note is the incredible spring back that it's happened so far in 2021. And so obviously it appears that if you look closely, the advanced economies felt the effects of the, should we call it perhaps short term, because it's less than a year's impact on its economy by COVID, and are also the slowest to recover when compared to emerging markets and with regards to the world average as well. I think it's a really great graph because it shows that 2020 a little bit of an outlier, obviously a biological and medical crisis, amongst others, a massive global pandemic, but with regards to the economics, and the underlying pressures on the economy, it's quite an interesting discussion if you start looking at what the central banks are saying, Bank of England, the European Central Bank, and the Fed, as well as other jurisdictions' central banks, and the type of levers that they have to play with. So obviously interests at a central bank level are at an all-time low, and Obviously, the emphasis there is to grow economic activity by helping consumers buy and be able to continue spending. And so I think we're well poised for that economic recovery that many people are talking about. Certainly, the initial shocks, I think, that many businesses faced in March of 2020 are now tempered a little bit. And so this is just a good graph to start thinking about. And just some additional information here to talk about different activity indicators and different industries and how they're faring with it. It's, I think, still fair to say that some industries like the travel industry and some retail as well are still feeling this lag effect that comes from government restrictions either at a federal or at a local level, which prohibit consumer expenditure the same way they did before. But overall, the indicators are good, I think. And I think as we go through this and as we hear from FLI clients, I think especially as well, we'll talk a little bit about business model stress testing and how this is actually a good indicator of how, not only how solvent businesses are, but also with regards to how much they can undergo one of these external shocks and one of these black swans. And certainly, I think businesses that didn't already have a succession plan or a crisis plan, or have good relationships with their banks, perhaps for potential loans that are required to tide them over for any cyclical or demand drop, have certainly done so and have taken that at a board level. So it's a very interesting phenomenon to look at. Just a few more indicators here. The equity markets are always quite a good indicator to watch for. And certainly, I think as attorneys, we're always interested in trying to understand which industries are seeing significant value uptick, whether that be with regards to certain assets that are coming in high demand. For M&A lawyers, transaction, corporate commercial lawyers, I think this is always a good indicator to look at as well. This is the MSCI indicators, so the global and emerging market equity indicators, which again reflect investor confidence as well in equity and in stocks as a good vehicle for growth. And I think again, being able to understand how that stress test has resulted in still, I think, quite stellar performances by a lot of companies is a good indicator of how robust those business models are, and will again prove that there's still a lot of equity left on the table. And as an investor in confidence grows, I think we'll see more and more investments in there as well. And on that note, because we talked about transactions, we've also seen a extremely high level of M&A activity and global IPOs. And I think that's a very interesting item to look at. This one doesn't necessarily showcase cross-border M&A activity or transactions, but I think the overall sentiment is that when it comes to transactions as a source of value to assist companies with hedging their corporate portfolios or looking at ways for them to perhaps invest in a new vertical, whether that be a complete new part of their portfolio or as a complementary group, that it's still a very robust strategy. And so we saw, I think, a significant uptick in the last quarters of 2020 and in the beginning of 2021 as well. And so we're still waiting for reports on Q2, but I think those standards will continue to grow. And I think many of the attorneys that we've spoken to, and I think as part of the FLI network, have said that they have been busier than ever, which I think is real proof that there's still a tremendous amount of interest, and that I think more focus as well on what these deals will bring to the table. And we'll share all of these slides with you because I think this may be something that you would like to discuss with your partners internally, especially as we talk more and more a little bit about how your firm is positioned in the market and the type of work that you do. Some of these graphs are very good points to talk about, especially as the market evolves and as client demand changes. It's important to understand which industries perhaps are seeing the most activity, and which proportion of your firm's work is coming from that particular industry. So that may inform needs for new practice groups, for new heads of sector groups. You may need to develop a few more regional desks as well. All of that will form part of what we'll talk about in terms of sustainability of legal service providers. And I think that's really the emphasis that we're going to be looking at here. So the main, I won't spend too much time on this, but some of the main global trends that we've seen, I think overall, more and more people are connected to work. Everything is cloud driven, and it had to be that way in order to provide employees and general workforce with an ability to work from home. And so, although local servers are still important, I think cloud-based solutions continue to grow. More and more connected living economies are going cashless. COVID certainly accelerated that adoption quite quickly. Supply chain optimization, that stress test from March of last year, really made a lot of companies look for secondary or tertiary vendors as troubleshooting or perhaps fail-safing some of those supply chains that they've utilized. Of course, the pivot to digital, whether that be digital health or just general technology overall, which is, again, if we look through the kind of this trend here, we'll move towards smart cities, but also a little bit of an exodus of some of these capitals where many consumers are just looking for different living that is more suburban in nature and are moving away from the city. So a lot of undervalued assets remain in the cities as well. So some of those other points here as well, we'll talk about human augmentation, talk about remote asset management solutions, especially if people are unable to travel. They've had to find other ways to work with local suppliers or vendors to assist with managing assets, whether they're in a foreign jurisdiction. And then just from a more general sense, we're seeing global organizations coming together to restore geopolitical and economic balance. So looking at economic stimuli and looking at other ways that governments, at a federal level or local level, are looking to stimulate the local economy as well. So what does that mean for the legal industry generally? This was, I think, a really interesting graph that was provided by LexisNexis to look at the year in review. And I think just showed some of the overall trends that we've seen in terms of, for example, if we look at the top right graph, which talks about growth by practice area. So some things have decreased slightly if you look at 2020 versus 2019. But if you look at the bottom left, the profit per equity partner has also grown substantially. And I think that may be obviously part of the fact that marketing and travel budgets haven't been used to the same extent as they could. And I think some of those savings and increased efficiency and more time worked, and perhaps in some instances a reduction in amount of recruitment activities has left more on the table. So I think all of those factors culminate together, and so that profit per equity partner, certainly in all areas. So if we look at the average versus the AM 100 or second 100 and mid-sized firms, has increased too. And the top left quadrant, if you look at that, is the average daily demand per full-time employee. So as attorneys, that demand for work has actually also dropped a little bit over the last year, but is oftentimes very cyclical. And I think most practice areas will have their own cyclicality mapped out in conjunction perhaps with deadlines from regulatory authorities, financial authorities, or within the overall business cycle when earnings are released and so forth. But that being said, I think we can all agree that it's been a good year. It's been an interesting year, and I think many have had to find ways to cope with those changes. And so the overall growth rate has been substantial. So across all practice areas, the average has been positive. And again, we'll come back to this, and we'll send these slides across so that you all have them to use and to think about internally. So what are corporate law departments thinking about? So what are inside counsel having to deal with? Obviously, COVID is one of those strands, but it's really perhaps to some of the partners or some of the inside counsel more noise than it is a signal, because although it's a fundamental change and it does, again, put that stress test on the business model, it doesn't necessarily mean that the other legal items that were already on their agenda or other potential risks are now, gone or have disappeared just because COVID has become #1 priority. And I think that has been a catalyst to thinking about a lot of the other issues and trying to think about preemptive methods to minimize any potential exposure. So obviously there are a few objectives. Employee safety continues to be one, business operations as well. And then some of those other strands, of course, working from home and trying to maximize the operational activities so that companies don't necessarily absorb more fixed costs until they've been able to optimize their current capacity with those fixed assets that they currently already have. And so that has that trickle down effect into supply chains and logistics and so forth. Compliance and damage control, I think just more generally risk assessments continue to be a very important point. And so we'll hear more about that from our clients tomorrow, but more and more clients are looking for that crisis management, but also being able to map at a really granular level where those potential risks may be coming from, and to set protocol systems and legal operations in place so as to minimize any of those issues and to hedge them. But they're going to have to react to the risk appetite of their principals, and I think legal counsel will also have to adapt and to understand the level of risk that their clients are willing to absorb, and then provide the legal advice in such a way that also fits with the business model of its principal. And that's a very interesting discussion that I think is fundamental, and many law firms will be looking at how to do that, especially with new vehicles and new assets coming into play, and especially with some of the legal precedents being a little more volatile or not yet fully available in new areas of law. Clients are going to be looking for expert advice on those areas that is also adapted and tailored to the risk appetite of their principal. So this is just that summary grid that provides a lot of information on not only the objectives, but also their strong and weak position in each one of these buckets. And we'll talk more about them. I think they're just a very interesting trend over the last year, which I think to some extent isn't going to be a big surprise to most of you. So what are those wider business industry changes that are transforming the legal industry? Tech, I think, is an obvious one and continues to be one, from a fundamental standpoint. Not only on the P&L, are those gross margins relatively higher and provide a bit of insulation when it comes to determinants or pressures from the economy or the market as a whole, but is a sustainable and extremely scalable strategy. So more and more law firms are going to be hiring non-lawyers at an executive level. More jurisdictions are allowing for law firm management to occur by non-attorneys, and so you will see a proliferation of hiring of non-attorney talent, and that obviously has a big implication for firm strategy, for fundamentals, for pricing, costing. I think there's going to be a lot more to look at in that perspective, and I think as that happens, more and more hires may be on administrative support or even development or legal operations altogether to assist in the client success, whether that be for new accounts or existing accounts. Focus on the client experience is key. So whether that be the initial touch point from when a new client makes contact with the law firm, all the way through to delivery and to repeat purchases, that client experience, every one of those touch points is one that now the clients are using as a benchmark to assess the overall quality of the package that the client is getting with that firm. And that's something that we've heard again and again. And I think not necessarily something that many law firms listened to maybe 5 years ago, but as competition continues to grow, client experience becomes extremely important. And that's, I think, a direct translation from their increased exposure to technology is we talk about the UI, so the user interface, and the UX, which is that user experience. And similarly in legal, the way that the services are rendered to their clients is of equal importance and is actually one of the critical points that clients will use in trying to find their legal partner. And again, together with that, emerging technologies, we talked a lot about AI, we talk about AR and VR, and at times I think we can all agree that some of these buzzwords that we'll see on LinkedIn or that we'll get newsletters about and webinars and conferences don't necessarily also mean that those are the main signal of the industry. But the legal industry will continue, of course, to innovate. And as newcomers come into play, especially perhaps legal tech startups, amongst others, and as some markets start to deregulate, especially with new talent being hired at executive levels for non-attorneys, for example, and we'll see maybe perhaps other jurisdictions experiment with the ABS model of the UK or other similar models or derivatives or even risk management firms that will provide everything but the legal advice. Technology will become an important factor for clients when looking for a vendor as well. And again, some of those other micro niches talk about client preferences for expert targeted services, high value expertise, so trying to match the client ROI with the legal vendor's return on investment as well, and trying to find win-win situations to try to move legal from a cost center to a source of value. So here's some of the changes. So you'll see the main components on the left, where we'll talk about traditional legal industry structures versus the ones of tomorrow. And this is by no means, set in stone, and we don't have a crystal ball, but these are some of the pressures that we've seen and that we've mapped out just to give you an idea of what we're seeing. If we look at the value curve from the current client demand, it's very much what we maybe consider transactional, litigation advice, deal specific, project specific, and the pricing structure still, I think, for the most part, remains hourly billing, time and material. And we know that that's a tried and tested business model, and of course works because it allows us to distribute our fixed costs over the number of hours of the personnel or the number of associates in a team, in the fee earners team. But if we look at the future, there'll be more and more need for legal case management, project management. There'll be more pressures on price because clients don't always understand or have the budgets for the hourly rates, only because they have those fixed budgets, because internally their department may be seen as a cost center as well. So that offering will pivot slightly and start to develop product portfolios, bundles, subscription models even is a possibility. We may think of it as retainers, but very much this could be a subscription model where the known cost is known but minimal, in such a way that the counsel or the client can distribute their costs in a variety of installments. So perhaps even looking at more, providing clients with more trade credit is also a possibility. That's an offering that makes it more attractive, delayed payment. And so legal tech consulting, looking at online dispute resolution, contract management, some of those terms are still very relevant. And so we'll have to look at then, as the demand for those products change, at evolving pricing structures as well. And that will put a lot of pressure on assets that are in high demand, because there's simply just not going to be enough hours in the day, and we'll have to price accordingly. And from an operational standpoint, again, we look at the traditional or the today view of doing business in the legal industry. From the value chain, it's very much they do it themselves, right? And law firms will do a lot of the work themselves. The cost structure is always going to be determinant on people, and we'll have a traditional pyramid, right, where we have heads of departments, heads of practice groups that lead their department and will then actively seek out business, and then be able to have associates or junior partners assist on those matters to try to find specialty within the department. In the future, that value chain may start to look to outsource some of those functions so as to optimize the amount of time that real subject matter experts can dedicate to rendering that legal advice in those transactions where in the portfolio drive the biggest impact to that law firm's revenue. And so some items may be outsourced altogether. There may be, smaller regional partnerships between law firms that attract the larger ticket items that may outsource projects or work to smaller firms under the premise or the label of the larger domestic law firm in order to save costs. So that could be a new model, is local franchising or local white labeling, similar to what we would see from some of the efforts made by U.S. Low-cost carrier legal offerings. So whilst quality remains the main determinant of selection for legal vendors, it's not the only one. And so if we look at the changes between 2019 and 2020, we've seen that actually good working relationships have grown significantly in what determines the choice of the legal vendor from when a client is choosing from its panel, but also the client service. Right, we talked about that user experience, that client experience, which has become so fundamental. Of course, the quality of service and the subject matter expertise of that specialist law firm, especially for the complex work, remains the most critical components when determining law firms. I think one of our clients, actually, who you'll hear from tomorrow, always makes it a staple to remind certainly us at FLI and his other vendors that the most important thing that they can do to assist him is to pass on work. So if an inquiry comes in to a particular legal vendor and the vendor knows that they're either unable to provide the assistance on that matter simply because they're at capacity, which can happen, and we've seen it happen, especially this year, they do not have the legal expertise in-house, or they do have it, but there are components of the project which remain unknown and would result, unfortunately, in the law firm having to spend a lot of time in staffing or sourcing those additional pieces of the puzzle to render that service. Our client would rather that the law firm save the client's time and pass on that project altogether. And that builds goodwill. So even if that particular mandate doesn't crystallize for the law firm at that local level, it actually still builds tremendous amount of goodwill with the client because it shows the support and that fiduciary duty to trying to assist the client, even if it means providing a referral in lieu of doing the work themselves. And it doesn't exclude the firm from doing more work in the future. In fact, quite the opposite, because it demonstrates, I think, from a signaling perspective that law firm is perfectly capable of identifying when they're unable to render the assistance instead of providing the guise that they can and then spending longer time on it and trying to solve for those issues, as opposed to finding the right partner for that client at that time. But that isn't, a one size fits all. And in some instances, of course, the law firm is going to be involved. But just very interesting food for thought here to see that the client expectations have changed slightly. So this is just, I think, a good anecdote, but there's a lot of discussions about whether or not law firms can take advantage of technology, and some surveys. This was the 2020 Wolters Kluwer Future Ready Lawyer report, which was a survey of a variety of law firms trying to look at, whether or not their firms were ready to adopt technology in the way that was being expected. And so if we look at this graph, a lot of them identify some barriers to that legal tech adoption. Most will determine that it's a lack of tech-savvy users, whether that be senior partners, and I'm not trying to point any fingers here. Whether that be senior partners closer to retirement that have a very strong workflow and have a tried and tested model in terms of how they work and how their department operates, or even whether that be a lack of familiarity with the available technology. I think we can all agree here that when a client is imposing a new e-billing system or another software to use and trying to slot it into an existing workflow, that ramping up cost in time and energy can be quite significant, actually. And some of those third parties erode legal service providers' ability to generate additional revenues simply because those third parties actually in themselves have a charge associated with them. There's a cost to adopting some of those e-billing systems or project management systems that indirectly are going to be going eat into the hourly rate or into the fee of that project because there's now a third party involved in order to do that. So that lack of familiarity can be a big barrier to entry. And in tandem with that, there's just not enough time to learn about all the technology available. And so a lot of law firms are investing in robust CTOs, chief technology officers, and IT teams, and to internalize some of them now. Simply because those demands are so high that the cost of not having an extremely efficient IT infrastructure can actually now be the determinant. That could be the fact that the business may lose a client mandate because the infrastructure isn't set to an optimal level that will fit the client's parameters. It's not unheard of that in client RFPs now, or in just introductory calls. Or first passes that they ask for a security detail on the law firm's infrastructure. So that can be anything from email encryption to on-site security of the premises and the way that the information flows between their offices. And I think that may be a continual trend that we'll see. And so that information security continues to be a significant, part of what it is that will be a barrier to entry. And then, of course, a lack of well-defined strategy. It's completely common for clients, perhaps more than law firms, to see technology as a panacea, or the silver lining, or the silver bullet, or should I say, that will solve all issues. And when in reality, operational efficiency or efficiency gains via technology are not in themselves a strategy at all. They're very much in nature and operational efficiency. And so that doesn't necessarily define the strategy of the firm or the client. And it will not solve all those issues. And I think the premise that it would are now more and more seeing the fact that that complementary relationship between the service provider and technology has to be in complete lockstep, or it just becomes an inefficient system altogether. So what are law firms using and what are in-house teams using? Obviously, inside or outside counsel, so firms are using timekeeping, billing, legal research. But interestingly enough, inside counsel are not. So 26% of the inside counsel from this survey by Bloomberg Law state that in reality, in-house counsel are disproportionately less probable to using inside or timekeeping technologies. Their billing systems in themselves are also less than their firm counterparts, and also do not have access to the same databases and legal research that I think obviously law firms will have compared to their inside counsel peers. But inside counsel do have access to more e-signature infrastructure and more collaboration tools. Apologies for the typo on this one, but it is a collaboration tool. So there more and more of the inside counsel will be using teams to collaborate with other departments, whether that be, their administrative or accounting, sales, marketing, or operations, or C-suite. A lot of technologies are used to bridge those gaps, whereas in law firms, that still seems very much like a silo structure. So less than half of law firms are using collaboration tools, either internally amongst themselves or in tandem with clients. And so that vehicle for communication flows still remains email for the most part. And then some of the unmet needs in legal tech, contract management continues to remain one of the areas that provides a few pain points. It has grown. Knowledge management, legal matter management, LMM, sorry. Client relationship managements, very little for the inside counsel. And firms are starting to use them more and more, but it's still an area that we could all do better at. And then, of course, drafting tools and business development. The other ones that are not highlighted in yellow are still of importance, but are below a threshold that we think necessarily warrants a significant note on, for example. And some of these are starting to be a little bit deprecated as well, as we'll see here.
Hey, Daniel, can you stay on that tech slide? Just
absolutely.
I just wanted to chime in here because, as all of you know, or most of you know anyway, we're in the thick of doing the GC channel interviews, and we're having guests every week. In fact, there are weeks where we have 2 GCs as interviews, and these will be on our YouTube channel. It's interesting to hear the GC or the AGC tell us what they think legal tech is, and then listen to what you, our partners, are telling us, where you're developing your legal tech. And it's almost scary that these two don't dovetail. They're not, there's no point of intersection. It's almost counterintuitive. We know that the big law firms are spending significant budgets to develop tools for them. And the question that the GCs are asking is, are those tools going to transcend into savings to the client? Are these tools going to be something that can be seamlessly integrated for a client to use? And they haven't seen that so far. We know the traditional ones, the timekeeping, billing, and e-signatures, those have been there for a while. And those that have usually accompanied me during the ACC conferences, we get to hear some of these vendors, and it's the same story. It's in fact, most of the clients that have adopted electronic billing, what they tend to do is they pass the cost on back to us. So it's an easy sell for these companies to say, hey, Mr. Client, you use us, and then you get your vendors to pay for it. And whether that's Collaborati or Telemetrics, or there are a few of those that our clients have passed on to us. And fortunately, you guys don't have to deal with it because we have to get onboarded, and it takes weeks. In the case of Caterpillar, it took months to get onboarded. And then they'd say, well, now you have to pay for the software yourselves. So as we get into our technology later on in the conference, you'll then start seeing that what we wanted to create was something that was really for the client. And if that in itself creates that kind of a sticky factor where they keep coming to use it, when we interview these GCs, they kept telling us, well, that's really what we wanted. And you all know that we interviewed every single one of these GCs, and we asked them point blank what the technology would have to look like. So I just wanted to make an inroad here and kind of soft seed it in your minds that what's off the shelf in terms of what's available technology right now on a commercial basis off the shelf, and what the clients want are not necessarily the same. And what the law firms, the big law firms with bigger budgets, are developing doesn't seem to be translating or percolating into the client in terms of savings, whether it's time, ease, or efficiency. Okay, so keep that in mind as we go into the technology part in a few minutes. Sorry, Daniel, keep going.
No, I think that's a great comment, and I think that's absolutely true. And many of our partners have told that to us as well. So I think a lot of relevance there. And so just to summarize those points in terms of technologies that are gaining steam or are becoming more popular, and then the ones towards the tail end that are becoming defunct or that are being deprecated or even cannibalized by other points. So obviously, this is not a webinar on technology. This is not a cohort or panel of IT specialists, but just food for thought. This may even just be something that through your practice you may encounter more and more. You perhaps have a group or a committee on technology internally on IT infrastructure. These are just some of the items that may come across in those meetings in the future. So, blockchain at the very top of emerging, almost speculation or not necessarily completely crystallized yet, and some of the other ones that are must-haves right now. So e-billing, cloud-based services, IP portfolio management, analytics, which feeds into all of those different areas. KYC, AML, items like that, and certainly at the B2C level, which is I think where most of should we consider the democratization of law is actually happening in the DIY law, and better access to justice and bundling of legal projects. But that's a completely different space. But interesting just to keep track of that, because oftentimes in most industries the B2C market will eventually find its way into the B2B market at one point or another. Again, we'll share this with you. Just quickly here, that legal tech adoption we talked about, for the most part, is going to be driven by startups and incumbents. So I guess for most law firms are familiar with this fact that, although the barrier to entry into the legal industry is, I think, fairly high compared to some other items, not only just because of the legal requirements and the expertise and the fact that it's very much a tacit business, there are still going to be pressures and perhaps revenues lost because of incumbents and startups that will more and more find ways to drive better value in some micro niche areas that were inherently taken for granted perhaps in the past by traditional legal service providers that just factor that into their revenue stream. And so always that pressure will be on that hourly rate, which clients will use as an earmark for vendor flexibility. And we know that that's not necessarily true because of the overhead structures of law firms. But that's, I think, where the innovation will come from is law firms may decide to just reduce their fixed costs by, removing some of those overheads, whether that be, office rent, whether that be the way they remunerate their attorneys. Perhaps some firms will look at more performance related remuneration structures for their associates. There's a litany of different things that can transpire as a result of a lot of those pressures, especially to look towards models that will remain sustainable in the long term. So let's look now internally. We've looked outside at the market, and I think this is going to be a very interesting conversation because I think most of you will recognize a lot of the things that we'll talk about here. And halfway through, I'll then turn the time over to a colleague at Lexology, Jonathan Bell, who will talk a little bit more about the marketing aspects of the legal industry and how FLI has been doing it. But I'll introduce him a little further down. But if we look at the target client profile, at a domestic level, I think we're all familiar with what our clients usually look like. They may be business owners. They may be C-suite executives. For those of you that have a private employment practice, of course, sometimes you may be representing individuals. But most of the time, the people you work with, from what we have at the FLI perspective, is traditionally US and UK centric in company origin, but more and more that's moving to Asia Pacific and EMEA or MENA. And the demographics of that target market are going to be inside counsel, general counsel, or other members of the C-suite, usually 35 years or older, with 10 plus years experiences, and certainly a Juris Doctorate, an LLM, or higher at that point. So the behavior usually is going to be risk averse. They're very budget oriented. Depending on the size of the company, at times it could be political. And so that can actually talk a little bit about how you are to manage your client relationship if there is a political, an internal political matter that as counsel you may be exposed to, and then it becomes difficult to nurture the relationship with the client in the event that the champion, which is your personal contact at the company, is either let go or switches to a different department. It becomes difficult to maintain those relationships. And so there's ways to do that. But overall, that risk averseness to risk from the inside legal department is one that is still very much prevalent. We can talk about risk adjusted, outlook to risk, because of course the risk appetite again of the principal factors into the way the legal department takes care of some of these items. Some of them will have a procurement mentality, and that you'll see if you're being invited to an RFP. Oftentimes, if the matter isn't inherently overly complex or novel, it's always very much a pricing discussion, and that's not always the one that is preferred, but oftentimes that's unfortunately a way to have to get your foot through the door, is the short-term pricing loss versus the long-term relationship where the prices can grow over time if you're able to get that agreement. So this is just that snapshot of the overall state of what we'd consider perhaps a generic or general segment profile of the target market. And you can read into this a little bit more. Maybe you can take it home and think about your clients that you service and see, maybe perhaps strike through some of the items on this list. It's actually my client is a risk-seeking client because they operate in the novel space with new assets, which is fairly deregulated at the moment, and is on a buying spree, and so wants to absorb as much risk as possible because there's a lot of undervalued assets. So that's very much a possibility, and perhaps the buying power is less with this particular client because they simply don't have a panel of law firms, and so I'm one of the only service providers, and so our relationship is the precedent for how we operate, and I'm very much a synergistic client, and I'm very much or a partner, and I'm very much involved with their day-to-day operations. So just something to think about. So just an idea, if we have to put it into images, because I always think that we don't want to only look at clients or prospective clients and numbers. Just to give you an idea of the visualization, many of the people on this image here will hear from tomorrow, and I think that's a very powerful group of panelists. And it's I think everything. So we have senior legal counsel, lead counsel, we have a CFO on this list as well, and so that bridge between what we consider a traditional silo structure where legal reports to the CEO only, is now we're seeing bridges built between the legal department and sales, and the legal department and marketing. So a lot of the more blurring of the lines, because legal is more and more actually used as an internal resource and asset that can actually provide greater value in the other parts of the business. Some of the people on this group, I think many of you have met them or have worked with them or for their firms in the past or even now in the future. And so I think tomorrow will be a great opportunity to hear from them and ask questions in the future. It's just really a really great group of panelists that we're excited to work with. Yeah, as a legal service provider, what are you looking for? Where do you add value, and how do you do that? This is just a business model mapping, of those different parts that form part of a traditional blueprint for a business model. And then we've overlaid some of the key legal issues that as a legal vendor, you may be thinking about. If we're thinking about revenue streams, are we talking about foreign direct investment or research and development as a source of revenue stream? If we're looking at particular channels, are we thinking about licensing, distributions, agreements, contracts? If we're talking about value propositions, are we looking at intellectual property rights? Excuse me. Are we looking at distribution or data privacy, which has grown significantly in demand recently? If we're looking at cost structures, are we looking at funding or financing? Are we looking at potentially bond issuances? Are we looking at equity financing? Are we looking at share sales? We're looking at asset deals. I mean, all of these items, when you start to assess your client's business model, you can actually start to put these into boxes and in meetings with your clients and start to ask these questions. It's like, hey, well, how are you guys doing since your last, financing and your Series E? I mean, how's that working? What markets are you looking to tap into? Is there anything that we can do on our end to facilitate some of these changes? And then these conversations and that intelligence and the rapport you build will trickle into, greater mandates and bigger ticket items. It may very much be that a startup that's gone through a few series of financing and have used you as a principal to assist with those different rounds will also use you through an IPO, which is a really great way to continue to build that rapport. So that's a good way to think about it is from a legal standpoint, as the legal vendor and as the main provider of that legal advice, are we hitting all of the different angles that the inside counsel has to worry about or that the principal is concerned with? And this is just a good way to visualize it. So it very much is a connecting the dots exercise. There's a lot to think about, and I don't think anyone will profess to be able to hedge all items at the same time. But if you start to connect those dots and understand, what the client is thinking about and how they're approaching it, I think there's a lot here that can be used in those conversations. And again, just showing you how those departments are being bridged, where we see traditional silos on the left. We're starting to see this, we would consider perhaps a transnational confederation on the right, where the C-suite and the stockholders are much more involved. And we're moving away a little bit from that pyramid structure where information asymmetry is very much categorized by department. Now it's being shared freely. And that's in principle, not only because of technology, but because of changes in culture, institutional guidelines, infrastructure, governance procedures, and reliance and interdependence, in a lot of these departments as well. So again, understanding what's going on with your clients internally is going to provide that value. So just a few more slides I'll go through quickly. This is just a traditional legal department in very, very, very large companies. Some of them are much smaller and only have a few practitioners in-house that can do it all. But in principle, understanding who you're liaising with in-house can provide you some insights into the type of work that you'll be exposed to, and understanding how they use their resources. So if a team is so large that they have a contracts team, they have a compliance team, and they have a head of M&A and a head of litigation and so forth, chances are the transactional components that will be outsourced or provided to you may be solely because you have the jurisdictional expertise and are able to render service and to appear in court on their behalf. And the other items, they'll internalize it. In other instances, if the department's very small, you may have a much, much more important role inside of those deals and to help that client, solely because you have the expertise and the capacity that they don't. And that make or buy for them doesn't necessitate an entire staffing of an internal team to absorb that much additional fixed costs and risk just to continue those legal operations. So understanding how that team is structured is also critical, I think. And this is a graph that I've shown before, but just to reiterate, there are different areas of value, and not all legal work is seen with the same lens. And that's, I think, a big mistake that we make in the industry, is just identifying legal work by the ticket, the ticket price of the legal work. I mean, we talk about triple crown, IPOs, M&A and litigation, or white collar crime or investigations and so forth, as really the highest yielding work, for which not only has a good hedge when it comes to how much time it takes to do them, how complex they are, which means higher billable rates and more time spent on these matters. But in many instances, we have to match it against how much value the client perceives of those operations. So here, yes, the Triple Crown may also interact and match the amount of value the client attributes to it. And so there's a good ROI, sort of say, both for the legal service provider, i.e. the law firms, and for the client. And so that's something to think about. If the client would like perhaps a generic contract review, we obviously can't charge Triple Crown rates on that, because it can be commoditized. And so the substitution of that to another provider is possible. And so it's not a perfect science, but there's certainly something to be said about, again, client relationship management and showing perhaps interim favorable rates, or perhaps one-offs in the benefit of building rapport, so that one can be considered for the Triple Crown rates, or perhaps get into some of those larger, more substantive matters in the future. So this is an entire part of firm strategy that you may want to think about in terms of where you're positioned. And as you grow from transactional into complex, you'll have a larger supplier strength of the client, because it'll be harder for the client to want to move and pick another vendor in the future, simply because they have so much legacy work with you that to migrate simply because of a discounted rate doesn't in itself justify that migration. And so this is how you start thinking about how you work with your clients from a key account management perspective. This is another great graph. Just again, to reiterate, and you'll see this in the slides when we circulate them, who it is you're advising. Are you advising the general counsel directly? Are you advising the assistant or deputy general counsel, or perhaps another member of the legal department? Or are you advising the C-suite directly, or a particular member of the C-suite? And so that actually changes how you interact with them and how they have that user experience. And same goes for their subsidiaries. Are you working with a subsidiary of a parent company? Or are you advising somebody as a that has to advise their corporate clients? And are they from the parent company, or are they head of a particular vertical? All of those items will factor into how you position yourself and factor the advice. And this is just that progression. Again, this is just an example on the FLI value curve to put it into words. But that escalator and that relationship that you build with the clients over time very much can start at a small transaction as a pilot project, and as you show greater value, more and more work can be entrusted, and more work can be won, and eventually you have that, again, that synergy that's built and the rapport that's built with the client that will be able to provide that collaborative approach. So that's complex work and a very collaborative and high trusting relationship with the client, which at the end of the day is still the number one item that clients will use to understand and to determine whether or not they should provide the work, is how much trust is built between the vendor and the client. So we'll go into marketing strategies now and talk a little bit about how you as a firm can market yourself. So, some of I think the core items that come to mind anyways is using FLI as a differentiator, and whether you should use them for domestic clients or foreign clients. We believe that both are a great way to do that. Whether you have jurisdictional exclusivity or not, and how you think about how you come to market, you should find ways to differentiate yourself outside of what may be considered the usual forms, which is, a very nice paragraph about the firm heritage and commitment to quality, clients, that isn't necessarily going to win them over. And so you need to find additional ways to market yourself. Could you pitch global? I think that's a very attractive proposition, is if you have a domestic client which has grown in their own market and is now looking to grow further, to use your leverage and your relationships with international networks such as FLI to pitch global and tell your client, hey, we can actually help you in Lithuania, we can help you in India, we can assist you in the Philippines, we have great firms in Germany and in the UK, we can assist you, and we have great colleagues that we work with regularly in the United States and in Mexico. That is a real selling point, because it again, the user experience that the client is looking for is one that is similar to the one that they've developed with you. I don't think any client is interested in being referred to another law firm that they're not familiar with, but they're relying on your endorsement as a validation point, and then be disappointed by the lack of quality, or the lack of systematic feeling, or the approach, or again, that user experience that they may get from that firm. So think about that. Think about what your endorsement means to your clients and what that referral looks like. And I think certainly with FLI and meeting each other via networking sessions and developing inter-firm rapport helps to make that more systematic. So we think a little bit as well about your strategy, commercial implications. Think about how the clients are changing, how they're bridging departments, and where you can add value at different areas. I think we're oftentimes not always doing as much as we can by fear of it appearing overbearing or too direct, that we hold back value, when in reality the client may not express it but may be looking for it. So always trying to find ways to add value is what is going to yield that demand. We'll talk in a minute about content output, and I think that's really the key now in 2021 and with regards to COVID, and I'll have a colleague speak on that and talk about the marketing strategy. And then segment your market and think about zero-sum games. Who are you trying to work for? Who are you trying to attract in your market? Is it international business? Is it winning a large proportion of domestic business, or both? How do you do that? And then think about, again, how do I and my client both win at the same time? How does it not feel like a one-sided relationship? And how do I as a law firm also not feel like I'm being abused in the interim, because the client has a great brand name and means they have great negotiating power when it comes to rates with me, and because I'm so fixed on making sure I can retain that client's logo in my pitch deck, I will do the work at a loss. That doesn't make commercial sense.
Hey, can I butt in here just for a second before we get into Lexology?
Absolutely.
Back to the previous slide. This is something that is very dear to our hearts, and some of you are really moving forward in this space. We have the networking sessions that are now bi-monthly, so there will be other events where you then get to break out into clusters, and then you can talk to 3 or 4 or 5 of your fellow colleagues, law firms, and then you kind of do the round robin and go around and get to know everybody that is in the network. And there are a number of new firms that have joined us since the transformation. But it's always very startling to me that for a few members, it doesn't matter who you are, the notion of pitching globally or regionally is still very alien to you. And it's not something that you're warming up. And it's this whole very draconian mindset that you control your client, and it's your client, it's your territory, and you don't want to venture outside of domestic. In some firms that are doing this in a much more progressive way, they're beginning to see the value. We hold systemic, planned, monthly debriefs with all of our clients. We're on calls at all times. There are instances where we invite all the members to join us. There are instances where members of our management team are involved. And there is not a single call that we have with our clients where somewhere during the conversation, we will broach, where else can we help you? What are some of the other pain points? Where are some of the friction points that we can help you? And invariably, they will say, well, now come to think of it, I do have this contract review or this issue on labor or this building that we're considering, and they hadn't even thought about it. And of course, because we are HQ, then we can quickly move the levers and introduce you accordingly. But you will be shocked to see if you were to offer that global bandwidth, that foothold that is around the world with your fellow colleagues, you're going to get into an interesting conversation with your clients that will result, if nothing more, in at least a higher awareness of your ability to be a global player, and possibly a mandate for one of your fellow brothers and sisters in the network who will be very grateful for you to venture and will be reciprocated. So think of it much more practically than you perhaps have in the past, because this is the new normal, is your clients have to think of you in this new technology world as an enabler worldwide. End of story. Okay, I think we're ready for Lexology.
Thanks, Orlando. I think that's really valuable. And I think towards the end of the session, you also have a few notes to share with the group about the next events and the networking sessions and how we can utilize that more fully to get to know each other better. So I think there's a lot of value there. So now I'm going to pivot slightly and this point here about optimized content output. This isn't an entirely a marketing-oriented, presentation, but I think it's a very important point that we want to talk about. I think a lot of networks, I think a lot of law firms are really struggling with trying to understand how to win new business. Do they email them? Especially if there are non-solicitation laws around that. Does one attract them using webinars? I mean, what are the right tools to use? And so in preparing today, we've invited a colleague and a friend, Jonathan Bell, who works with Lexology, who sits in Hong Kong, to talk to us a little bit about Lexology, which is a vehicle to publish content, and how law firms are using it, how FLI is using it, and why this is also an important part of a firm's marketing strategy. So I will pass the time over to Jonathan, who will spend a few minutes just walking us through some of the items therein, and then from there, we'll resume a little bit later on. But this is a great opportunity just to have a guest speaker come in and talk to us a little bit more about how that fits into a firm's overall marketing strategy.
Daniel, thank you for your kind introduction. And everyone, it's great to be back in front of you at First Law International. I have many fond memories from the FLI conferences from a number of years ago. I believe my last one was all the way back in 2015. So one move, a pandemic, and possibly a few kilos later, it's great to find myself speaking to you again today. And thank you for the introduction. Now, what am I going to speak to you about today? Well, there are three key points. First of all, an overview of the FLI Lexology partnership that we started up last year. Second of all, I'm going to be talking about some of FLI's results to date on the Lexology platform. And then third of all, I'm going to give you a bit of a summary on what in-house counsel wants to read. And this is going from the data from our platform. So first of all, we have this network hub page for the First Law International network on Lexology. Now, this page features all of the contributions from any FLI member firm that comes through, like so. Now, we also have all of the different practitioners who are ranked as well in terms of the most read in recent past. We also have all of the various social media feeds that are also linked in as well. Now, really fantastic ways to promote the network But also what I really like about this page is it really presents the network as a really cohesive group and links everyone together. So there's also a contributor profile that we have separately for FLI as well. So next slide, please. Here we have all of the contributing firms that are currently posting on Lexology from across the nexus of LBR products. Now, we have a number of really solid contributors, and FLI is indeed one of them. Now, one of the things that I really wanted to pick out about FLI specifically that the network is doing that no other legal networks that we are currently partnering with are doing, and that is creating content. I think one thing it would absolutely pass with praise is that the FLI core team are creating regular content and creating articles to then really drive those referrals, drive that inbound work from all the fantastic articles that are being created. But here is this slide is taken from the FLI network hub page, and you can actually click through to any one of the contributing firms through to the individual firm's hub page arising from that. So next slide, please. And just a bit more on the FLI branding that's then featured on the individual contributor pages. Now, any article that's contributed carries the tag of member firm of FLI. Now, whenever that link is then clicked, it then takes users through to that network hub page that I showed you before. And again, it's another way to really link all the firms in together. And it's an added benefit that due to the FLI partnership that it is largely unique to FLI contributors that are currently posting on Lexology. So next slide, please. So in terms of the content that we have been sharing on behalf of FLI, here are the top users to date. We have a number of really high quality companies that have been accessing the content, including my previous company, you'll note, Practical Law Company and Thomson Reuters, who themselves is a really fantastic partnership that FLI has in place, but also a number of absolutely first-rate global organizations. When we look at the spread amongst specific sectors, you'll note that industrial goods and services is the lead sector with 30%, banks 15%, the tech sector 10% of overall readership, and construction is 7% of readership. Then equal fifth place is insurance and oil and gas with 5% overall. Next slide, please. So when we do a deep dive on the actual results that have been generated by specific pieces of content, here we have the rise of digital banking. Just as an example of one of the pieces that FLI has contributed to the Lexology platform. Now, once the article is written, we then tag it with the relevant work area and we distribute it to Lexology's audience, which includes the entirety of the Association of Corporate Counsel and a number of other partner organizations. And this is an indication of some of the readership that we generate for specific articles. Now, you'll note that what we can do is tell you the level of interaction for specific organizations. So we know that Swiss Re, for example, we're able to see that they've saved the article and they've also clicked through the body of the text, along with Santander have done the same. We can tell the location, the indices, but also the sector as well of the reader. But we absolutely stop short of sharing any privileged personal information of any of our contributors, which is indeed why we have all of these fantastic data sharing arrangements with a number of leading organizations, say the Law Society of England and Wales in-house division, for example. So next slide, please. And now what I'm going to talk about is some of the most successful types of content across the Lexology platform. Now, everything that I'm going to be talking about now really zones in on what the data here at Lexology tells us. Obviously, we track in very, very fine detail the articles that do well on our platform and the ones that don't necessarily do well. We have all of the data that can then follow this through. Now, first of all, going beyond the facts, I think in many cases, you know, what I at times see from law firms is they say that the building is on fire, but they don't necessarily talk about the actual response that individual in-house counsel should take. Or it was once explained to me by the GC of a global organization who said to me, look, I know that the sky is falling in, but I need to know why the sky is falling in and how it's going to affect my business ultimately. And that in itself will be a valuable piece of content when you really zone in on the impact of a specific legal update. Second of all, get their attention. Now, often I see at times, say, newsletters that are that will carry just a generic name, such as say, pensions news, April 2021, for example, like that. I think when you're writing a title, you've really got to draw that user in. Coming back to that example of the GC that I had this conversation with, he said that he gets around 30 to 40 different emails a day from various different law firms with, for the most part, untargeted legal updates that don't necessarily cater to his specific area of interest, and that's employment. So I think when you're considering that you're competing against a lot of other noise, it's really crucial that you include a high quality title to draw the user in. So I'm going to run through some examples shortly as well, but there's a couple that I wanted to pick out. For example, dealing with, just from today actually, looking at Lexology's top most popular articles, dealing with an insurance adjuster, what not to say, or defamation on social media, what can you do about it? That's telling the user that there's going to be an actionable takeaway that they can fundamentally use. So also think about that précis of the piece. So that first sentence, or indeed the first paragraph as the whole précis, is also critically important, because when users are say looking at, let's say, skimming through their emails, or for example their Lexology feed, they will see the title, but they will also see a brief précis. So making sure that you can really capture the essence of the article in that first sentence, I think is really, really important too. Third of all, talking about why it matters and issues that are going to be important to them, instead of just regurgitating the same sort of material that they may have heard from other organizations. Now, also talking about article length, often I get asked, what is the ideal length of article? Now, anything between, we tend to say anything between 600 to 1200 words in total. If you are looking, if you say have written an article that is 3,000 words long or 4,000 words long, think, okay, how can I break this article down into a series of contributions instead of having one flash of that content? Because if you think about it, it's going to be distributed, whether it's your distribution list or Lexology's distribution list or any of the other content aggregators that are out there, it's going to get one hit if it's that 3,000 word piece. So break it down into individual articles as a whole series. And then there's what we like to call the so what test. Now, are you telling the reader something that really matters? And really look to provide specific nuts and bolts, as I say, going beyond the facts, that have practical and actionable takeaways. And also the questions that you're posing and that sort of FAQ style, is it satisfying that so what test is how we describe it. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the articles that are most successful and article styles that are most successful now. So first of all, explainer articles. Now, looking at, say, the explosion of say, NFTs, with rapidly evolving news items that are, say, practice areas that are, or specific points that are rapidly evolving, it's good to talk about an explanation. What is it all about? But also specifically, what do in-house counsel need to know as to that specific development? So here's a couple of great examples for explainer articles that I'd like to pick out. But next slide, please. Okay, so also an angle on a particular topic as well is really key. So you can use, we have a lot of NLP data tools at Lexology where we can identify specific areas of topics that there is a real thirst for content. There's not a lot of content at the moment, so that's just a bit of an insight as to that tool and towards the bottom left-hand corner. But to use the NLP example, the NFT example, it's a really hot topic. So what for a hot topic like that, or another topic that is, say, trending in your jurisdiction, say for example the omnibus law is another great example that we had for Indonesia towards the end of last year and early parts of this year. What specific angle can you take on a particular topic? Now, something to do with practice areas is often a great approach to take. And in this case, this firm has picked out the intellectual property angle on NFTs with great effect, which is why the article was a huge success on our platform. Next slide, please. So also coming to some of the stories that we see in the news. One fantastic strategy is just to follow the business press and look for a legal angle on any particular issue. Now, obviously, one of the issues that we've had, it's been extremely prevalent this past year, is COVID-19. Now, here are a couple of great examples though from Rajan and Deckard with regards to taking them an angle of what this means to know, what this means to you, and everything that in-house counsel needs to know in regards to specific developments relating to COVID. Now, many of you may be thinking that you're cautious because the topic has been covered many times before. That's often the concern I get from law firms, to say that we want to take a fresh angle on a particular topic. But actually, many in-house counsel tell us that they like to read multiple articles on any specific given issue and then take different opinions. It really comes down fundamentally to the key word, and that is analysis, and making sure that there's plenty of it in your article. Next slide, please. And then last of all, another really fantastic angle to take is looking on an industry basis. So how can you zone into, say, the oil and gas developments relating to, say, the Biden administration, for example. Taking an industry angle on any particular topic is another really fantastic way to take it into, and to extend the argument and take a new angle on it. So often law firms tell me that they take an industry sectoral approach in regards to the way that they structure their law firms. So there's absolutely no way that this wouldn't necessarily work as well for your approach to marketing. How can you target specific sectors in the content that you're writing, and really show that you have that deep sectoral knowledge with regards to the analysis that you are offering. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to say in closing that one of the really fundamental aspects of content marketing, and really, this is the ball game. What it's all about is you've got to be able to have specific and measurable takeaways in regards to the content that you are writing. On average, it can take one of the stats that I've heard take up to 3,000 USD in sunk cost time from lawyers to create one piece of content. So you've got to make sure that it's really targeted, but also you're measuring the success of the article, and that absolutely can be done, as you've seen today, and tracking inquiries through the reporting. I had a friend of mine in the CEE who reported back that he's received a couple of really fantastic inquiries off the back of writing articles. One from a Chinese SOE, the other from a German automaker, and then you track on Lexology Analytics or another, say, analytics platform that those organizations had read the article a number of days before. So that's one of the really fundamental things about content. So what else have I told you? Go beyond the facts in regards to the content that you're writing, get their attention, but also consider that so what test that I mentioned. And finally, in regards to the special benefits that we have available to FLI member firms, first of all, there's an absolutely guaranteed, no obligation free trial that you have the opportunity to participate in. And that can be facilitated through First Law International directly, which is just a matter of sending a handful of articles over that you would like to contribute. Absolutely, no need to continue after that free trial. It's purely a meritocracy. Second of all, that special banner that I've mentioned on all of the content that has been contributed by FLI member firms. And lastly,
I thought.
Hi there.
Well, I think we should discuss each one. I mean, I think they've not really picked up on too much, I think, in my view.
Hello? Right.
Brian?
So
I think it was an unintended.
I see. Okay.
Okay.
No
You're
problem.
about to wrap it up,
Thanks,
so
Orlando.
thank you, Jonathan.
Indeed. So just one final point. You can actually contribute articles under the FLI banner. Now, there's a very limited run of articles, only 20 that can be done via FLI. And if you want to contribute an article, the FLI can then contribute to us under the FLI account, then that is possible. That's limited to only 20 contributions. So do get in touch with FLI in regards to contributing through that avenue. And then there's no even need to do a free trial. You can then see the same results. So thank you, Orlando, and Daniel, back to you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Really appreciate your words on that, and I think it's just very valuable. I feel like there's so much we could talk about there. We could dedicate an entire session to that. We could spend a few hours on it, but I think short and sweet there and to the point, which is essentially the fact that we need to think about how we are marketing our services across. So in terms of, hold on, there we go. In terms of FLI Digital, this is going to be our very last segment today. Just a couple of slides on this to just reiterate a few points. The FLI Flight 1 system is fully operational. So if you're not yet registered on it, get in touch with me and we can issue credentials to you and members of your firm. You can also add partners or associates from your firm. If they are working on a particular mandate on the system, we can very much do that. And we're pushing updates regularly. So you'll see changes, enhancements, and other great tools come about as well. And so you'll see that although this effort seems very relevant now, these were efforts that were started almost 3 years ago as FLI saw these digitalizing trends coming. And obviously with COVID, that's been accelerated. So it's been a good fit for the current client demand, which has been, I wouldn't say entirely fortuitous, but certainly beneficial now. And I think that this benefit trickles into local counsel as well. so local firms that are part of the network. So, seeing value both ways, both on the client side and on the council side. And so again, some of those tools that we've talked about, the Flight One system, so new projects, you receive quotes, negotiating rates. We can track progress now for firms that have 5, 6 projects running simultaneously. Instead of checking different inbox folders for different emails and different changes to those emails, and having to go through a 50-thread email to verify that everybody has seen it or what have you, within a few minutes you can check the status of all of your projects quickly and in the system's back end by logging in and seeing which client mandates you're working on and so forth. So there are tutorials available and other items as well. But I know most of you have heard this before, so I don't want to spend a tremendous amount of time on it. But it is, I think, quite ironic that it fits with our overall trends that we've seen earlier on this presentation and fits with that general digital trend. And as we like to say, this is just a beginning. There are a lot of new things that we want to continue to work on to make not only our clients' experience more sticky and by default make our local council appear much more valuable in the service that they bring to clients, but continue to give our partners an ability also to use this as a way to market in their own domestic market. Because if you have access to the technology, and as Jonathan rightfully said, you have a co-branding effect with FLI on some of the literature and press and content that you're putting out, as well as the way that you're competing for work, very quickly you can realize that the value curve that you're creating and what is being reflected in the market is going to be far superior to your next available legal service provider. And so it's not just in terms of low costs, but now you're really competing on value, which justifies the fees. And I think that's the real takeaway here. The FLI Institute as well. Not too sure how many of you have been able to work with this yet, but it is a tool that's being recommended and used more and more. It's the FLI compliance solution, digital means to assist clients with training employees on various areas of their code of conduct. And I think some of you are using this and are working with us at least in training some of the clients' employees in country and localizing some of these areas of law for FLI and for their clients. More will be talked about this. We will run some events through the summer where we will do deep dives on this, because this is, again, an entire iceberg of topics that we would like to get insight on from each of you, particularly with some of your own areas of law in your local host jurisdiction, and to see what demand your clients are talking about when it comes to compliance solutions. But, just wanted to post that out there and to ensure that everybody was aware of it. Again, most of those topics will be, on the code of conduct, whether it's anti-corruption, anti-bribery, which, as you all know, are FLI staple modules, but more and more of those are growing into health and safety, gift giving, conflicts of interest, harassment, and so forth. So that can really grow. And I think some of you have already started to see those requests by clients as they ask for more and more content, and sometimes want it to be in a form that's codified. So a legal opinion, as useful as that may be, doesn't always translate into being able to train an entire department on a particular matter. And so a vehicle like the FLI Institute or another presentation or educational platform is going to be necessary in order to convey that information, which oftentimes is very tacit and requires analysis and best practice examples and case studies. Finally, the FLI Slack continues to be a service that we want to highlight. Opportunities are being circulated on the FLI Net Slack. This workspace is really popular, but also very useful. That has a lot of opportunity to share news, events, to troubleshoot, to get in touch with a partnered particular firm on a one-on-one. If you don't have their email yet, you can go in and directly look them up in the roster and contact them and set up a call. So please take advantage of that. If you're not yet signed up on it, also feel free to get in touch with either Raluca or myself, Raluca, of course, being our head of marketing, and we can issue credentials to you and to members of your team and make sure that you're getting access to the right channels so that you can be in the loop on those opportunities. And so, again, I won't spend too much time because I know most of you are familiar with this service. So in closing, I know we have a few more minutes, and that we've done that on purpose because I know in the past we've gone over, so we were very sensitive with time this time around. But just to reiterate that today we have these two sessions, one at 10 and one at 7 p.m. CEST Brussels. And that's the current session that we've just gone through today. The one this evening will be a duplicate or a mirror. We'll do the same session for the Latin America and North American cohort. If you wish to be able to come onto that one as well, please feel free to do so. But tomorrow, there are two separate events. They are different. Again, it's 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. Central European Summertime. And that will be with the two separate client cohorts. So I'll turn the time over just briefly over to Orlando, as he may have some comments to share with us as we close, and also to introduce the panels for tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks to everyone that is, just hanging in there. This 2 hours have flown by. We got 10, 15 minutes left. But I have to, of course, this is very anticlimactic to all of us, right? A couple of years ago, we were hosting a beautiful conference in lovely Vienna, and we can go back in history 15 years. And in the fall, we were in Sydney, and now we can't do that. And so all the excitement, all the data, all the slides, and all the glossy videos and movies cannot substitute the fact that we can't see each other, at least not yet. But we look forward to that. I know our stellar UK members have kept all the food in the fridge for a year and a half, and they can't wait to host the event in the spring of next year. So we look forward to that. But at the end of the day, we are doing much better than anybody could have ever dreamed. We started a digital transformation a year ago. We had some grumblings about some members that didn't think it was the right move. We stuck to our guns, and the majority of our members are still with us, and we've gained new members as well. These new member introductions, while we would normally do those during the spring conferences where we spend 3 days together, obviously in these 2-hour events, introducing new members would complete, 10 new members would take out the entire 2 hours. So we're going to have those in the networking cluster meetings that we will put every other month. So you'll get a chance to meet the new members from all over the world. And also you'll get a chance to talk more about practice groups and practices in terms of, how we can create better synergies. And so we are coming to the end of this digital spring conference. What a year it's been. Last year when we hosted the event, most of us were kind of scratching our heads, figuring out how we're going to cope and survive or even thrive. But here we are, and it is a tribute to your resilience and to your ability to come up with solutions that meet the needs of your clients. And there is so much more that we can do. I really think that one of our panelists said it best during the dry runs. We had 2 dry run sessions with them last week and yesterday, coming up with ideas of how they want to host the panels tomorrow. And one of them said it best. He said, I really, really hope we don't let COVID go to waste, and that it ends up being just a little bump on the road and that nobody really learned from it. And there's so much, whether we publish articles, whether we start trending differently, our numbers are up on LinkedIn, on Facebook. Every one of our social media channels is doing great. We started 2-3 months ago with the GC channel. We're interviewing all these great clients, and they're giving us insights that you cannot get when you're talking to them about issues that are confronting their businesses. This is when we get to know them as human beings and as people. And they're going to be hosting tomorrow. On the next slide, Daniel, I think it shows a little bit about the makeup of the. So this is the morning panel. We'll have the AGC or the GC for Asia Pac of Medtronic, as a client that we've had for many, many, many years. But it's great that we reconnected with Campbell, who has moved quite a bit in Asia Pacific. And then there's Todd Benson. Todd Benson is the new GC for Flexport, and he was the former AGC for UPS. So he is no stranger to the freight forwarder business. And some of you are acting for Todd right now in Asia Pacific and in Latin America. Vincent Pringieres is a very charismatic individual and an FLI client. We're acting for him in 10 or 12 different countries. He is actually a Belgian-born, living in Luxembourg, working for an Austrian company with holdings in Brazil. Very, very eclectic individual. So this panel, which is the morning, we call it the Asia Pac panel, is going to be very quaint and intimate, because with 3 GCs, we will be able to really have a deep dive conversation on the issues of interest. They've agreed on the content. It's going to be very interactive, and they are expecting you all to engage with questions. They're expecting you to be part of that conversation. They're going to be, in some cases, testing your fiber by asking specifically on matters of interest to them. And they're hoping that you're going to be very up and aware of trending issues. We will send today the summary, if you haven't seen it, just refresh your mind on what are the topics that they liked and that they want to touch on. Okay, so that's the morning session. And in the afternoon, because that's the Americas, there are a lot more. So it's twice as big. But some of these are brand new clients. David Carr is the GC of Advanced Bionics. Most of you have already at least done one memo for Advanced Bionics, which is a sort of a game-changing technology for the hear and impair. It's an incredible breakthrough technology, and they are worldwide. We're doing a rollout project with them from 57 countries. Brenda Perry needs no introduction. She's an old friend of FLI, and she's the only non-lawyer, so she has very invaluable insights. Neil Loy is a new client. I mean, Vital Strategies is still our client. Neil Loy is the new GC. We're working with her in 10 or 12 different countries. Evan Slavitt, you know him. He's the GC of AVX, which recently got acquired or incorporated by Kyocera. So you're talking about an $18 billion company. Christina Filosa is working for EDC, which is one of these very incredible NGOs that are doing education to improve life standards all over the world. And Amy Flackney was with us last year, and she is the GC of an energy company. So very interesting panels, different mindsets, different ideas, but ultimately they want to get to know you better. You want to hear from them what makes them happy FLI clients. And hopefully together, what we've shared with you now, some of the things that you may already know as common sense, some of the things may have been relevant to hear from other individuals. Ultimately, the quintessential question for all of us remains, what has COVID accelerated? What has happened? And something that isn't going to change anytime soon is high quality, timely delivery, and value for money. Those 3 elements are going to be pivotal in the chase for secure and legal counsel. When we look at the fact that last year, the Financial Times thought that we were a disruptor again, and then the Lawyer Awards gave us the Global Network of the Year, it's become clear to us that we're in the right track and that we needed to shift into technology. I find it very interesting that this morning, and with permission, I can read one paragraph. The the lead counsel for Shell, with whom we have been working relentlessly for over a year and a half on the technology part, said this morning to me. Since we spoke last, I've been working on building a greater awareness of the services that we with FLI have created together. This is Shell. One item I would like to gauge for your support in principle is to reference FLI as an entry for the service in the Lawyer Awards on the most innovative use of technology category, showcasing FLI's innovative platform and existing technology, which has enabled us to provide a deep product lawyer capabilities, both for Shell and FLI, to produce a service which IT professionals can get a straightforward advice in an increasingly complex and regulatory area. So our platform is having the effect that we thought was going to have. Most of our clients, not all, because we are not going to force that on them, but we are making it available. New clients that try it, they stay with it. They love it. Existing clients have migrated and others are considering it. But what is true is when you take very large clients that have multinational projects in multiple jurisdictions, then the technology is a game changer for them. So we hope that this is something that you will agree with. We certainly look forward to expanding more and making it even easier and more exciting to work with. Another thing that we find very interesting is that when we have the interviews with the GCs, they are actually telling us to tell you certain things, but we're going to hold that until tomorrow so you can hear it yourselves. And ultimately, after 18 plus going into 19 years, you all know that this has been my life's work. And I'm very grateful, and I'm reminded every day how humbling it is to be trusted by the very people that create the value of First Law International, which is you guys, our beloved partners and correspondents who are out there. Thank you for trusting us. Thank you for supporting the transformation and the changes that came to some perhaps a little too fast or a little too far from what you had originally envisaged when you joined the old FLI network, but is now in an uncanny way a powerhouse in a brand that is followed by thousands of people in LinkedIn and in Facebook and other social media outlets. And now with the ability to publish articles and the partnership with Lexology, we still have our partnership with Thomson Reuters, but I think Lexology is really cracking a good trend in the digital world, and we're happy with that. So, in a way, we sort of apologize that we don't get to hear from you guys right now, but we feel that with so many people, then the questions would drown the purpose of the meeting. So just to remind you, for those of you diehards that can't get enough of this, you're welcome to join us again in the afternoon, because then the partners and the members would be from the Americas and for Latin America as well, and some Europeans. And then we really want all of you to be with us tomorrow for both panels, because you will hear all of our clients, or at least this cohort of clients, tell us what makes them be such loyal promoters of the FLI value proposition. So with that in mind, all it's left is to wish you all a tremendous rest of your day or afternoon, wherever you may be. And if there are any closing remarks, Daniel, any other parting comments, or Raluca, any parting comments for tomorrow's events? Everybody's got their invites. Everybody knows what to do. Ralu, you want to say?
Yeah, Sorry, go ahead, Ralu.
Yeah, so everybody has their invites for tomorrow. If you could please sign in before the event and check out the documents that we've sent you with some guidelines. That would be wonderful. I think you have everything over email, but please, if you have any questions, reach out to me today, and I'm happy to help. But I think from my side, you have everything.
Okay, fabulous. Okay, we'll see you all later this afternoon if you want to, but otherwise tomorrow. Have a great day. Thanks for dialing in and being with us.